Everyone in Dubai thought they already knew who the real engineers were, until one Filipino blueprint walked into the room and shattered 30 years of arrogance in a single afternoon. First they laughed at it, mocked it, threw it aside like a joke. But when the proud Dubai chief engineer finally tested what he rejected, the results didn't just humble him. They shook the entire construction world. Because what he dismissed as impossible turned out to be the future, and a Filipino proved it. If you're interested in this topic, hit the like button, subscribe and type "interested" in the comments, and I will give you a heart. Rashid Al-Munsari had spent 3 decades believing he had already seen the limit of what engineering could be. When you've built skyscrapers that scrape the sky, survived sandstorms strong enough to snap steel cranes, and earned awards that sit behind glass cases instead of dusty shelves, you start to think you've mastered the game. You start to think nothing can surprise you anymore. And that was Rashid's greatest flaw. He believed he was done learning. He believed innovation only came from the same 3 places: Germany, Japan, or the United States. He believed the future could only be shaped by giants. So when a proposal stamped Manila, Philippines landed on his polished mahogany desk, he didn't feel anticipation. He felt amusement. And that's where the story begins. Because the man who thought he had nothing left to learn was about to get humbled so completely, the entire construction world would talk about it for years. Rashid skimmed the first pages with the casual confidence of a man who had rejected thousands of proposals before lunch. German designs were predictable. Japanese designs were reliable. American designs were expensive. But this Filipino proposal, it felt different. Almost too different. On page 12, Rashid's eyebrow arched. Then he laughed, loud, unfiltered, humiliating for whoever wrote the blueprint. Bamboo. He actually said it out loud, mocking the idea as if it were a punchline. Bamboo in Dubai. What's next? Building elevators out of coconut shells. His assistant stayed silent. She had learned long ago that questioning Rashid's confidence was like arguing with a storm. Useless. Rashid closed the folder with finality. He didn't even bother finishing it. Reject it, he said with a sigh, as if doing Manila a favor by dismissing it quickly instead of dragging out the humiliation. But arrogance has consequences. Sometimes they come immediately. Sometimes they take their time. In Rashid's case, the consequences began the next morning, when he presented his recommendation to the selection committee. The German firm he favored had a design that looked like everything he had already built, and that's exactly why he liked it. Familiar. Predictable. But the committee wasn't blind. They asked about the Filipino proposal. Rashid rolled his eyes. It's unrealistic, he said. They suggested integrating bamboo into a 40-story skyscraper. Bamboo. In Dubai. It would never work. The younger developers exchanged glances. Someone murmured, but the sustainability score. Rashid shut it down with the confidence of a man whose voice alone could tilt a vote. No bamboo. No experiments. We are building a legacy tower. Not a novelty. The meeting ended. The German bid won. Manila's proposal disappeared into a rejected file like thousands before it. Rashid slept that night with a clean conscience. He had protected his legacy, protected Dubai, protected the future, or so he thought. 3 weeks later, his inbox chimed. One new message. The subject line, a clarification from engineer Carlos Garcia. Rashid almost ignored it. But curiosity, even in arrogant men, is powerful. He opened the email. It was short, polite, and strangely bold. Carlos asked for 30 minutes. No pressure. No request. Just a chance to show something in person. Rashid nearly deleted it. But something, call it instinct, call it guilt, call it the whisper of doubt he'd never admit, made him type back. Tomorrow. 2 p.m. 30 minutes only. The next afternoon, Carlos Garcia walked into Rashid's office. He didn't have the intimidating aura of a German engineer or the polished arrogance of someone who graduated from a top Western university. He wore a simple suit. His briefcase was scratched and old. He didn't look like a man who came to challenge Dubai's most decorated engineer. He looked like a man who came prepared. Rashid didn't bother offering coffee. "You have 30 minutes, he said. Carlos nodded with quiet confidence. He opened his briefcase and placed a bamboo cylinder on the desk. Rashid almost laughed again. Almost. Until Carlos clamped it down and began hanging weights from the extended end. 2 kilograms. For in. The bamboo didn't bend. Not even slightly. Rashid leaned forward. His eyes narrowed. Bamboo shouldn't behave like that. Definitely not under that load. Carlos repeated the test with a steel tube of the same weight and dimension. At 8 kilograms, the steel bent more than the bamboo had. Rashid felt something unfamiliar, uncertainty. Carlos didn't gloat. He didn't smirk. He simply explained, "Bamboo has comparable tensile strength to steel but is 6 times lighter. And flexibility, not rigidity, is what saves buildings during earthquakes." He pulled out simulation videos showing 2 buildings, a steel-only structure and a bamboo-integrated hybrid. When the simulated earthquake hit, the steel building twisted like a breaking spine. The bamboo hybrid swayed, flexed, and recovered. No structural failures. Rashid felt heat rise in his face, not because he was impressed, but because he suddenly realized something horrifying. He hadn't read the full Manila proposal. Carlos revealed more. A real building in Manila, 12 stories, had survived Typhoon Mangkhut's 200 km/h winds with 0 structural damage. The steel-only building beside it. Visible buckling. Rashid wasn't dealing with guesswork. He was dealing with data. Real-world results. Proof. And worst of all, the proof had been in the proposal he himself rejected without reading. Pride is heavy. But humiliation, that's heavier. Rashid exhaled through his nose, trying to steady himself. "Why didn't you put this in your proposal?" Carlos blinked. "I did. Page 47 to 63. Rashid closed his eyes. He remembered stopping at page 20. He remembered laughing. He remembered dismissing an entire engineering philosophy based on assumptions. That's when something cracked inside him. Not his ego, but the belief that innovation had a nationality. He made a decision that shocked even him. He picked up his phone and ordered his team to run a full wind load simulation on the German firm's design, using last year's updated Dubai storm data. The next morning, the results shattered him. The German design failed by 8%. 8% meant instability, risk, liability, the very things Rashid despised. When the committee reconvened, the room was irritated. The project was now officially in trouble. Rashid stood at the head of the table. Every eye watched him. Every ego waited to judge him. And Rashid did something he had never done in his career. He admitted he might be wrong. He presented Carlos's full proposal. Not the pages he skimmed, not the assumptions he made, but the real engineering behind it. Suddenly bamboo didn't look like a novelty. It looked like a weapon, tool, breakthrough, strength, flexibility, sustainability, lower cost, faster construction, lighter weight, safer performance. The room shifted. Doubt became interest. Interest became acceptance. And acceptance became approval. For the first time in Dubai's architectural history, a Filipino engineer won the contract for a 40-story tower. That day, the construction world tilted just a little, because a blueprint from Manila had beaten German steel. And it wasn't luck. It was engineering. Over the following months, Rashid worked side by side with Carlos. Every assumption Rashid once held about Filipino engineering collapsed like weak concrete. Carlos wasn't just talented. He was visionary. His methods were precise. His understanding of materials was surgical. His respect for nature-driven design was decades ahead of the global curve. And as the bamboo-integrated skyscraper rose floor by floor, a quiet revolution rose with it. The building was lighter, requiring less foundation depth. The structure was stronger, exceeding wind load requirements by 18%. The timeline was shorter. Construction finished 4 months early. Engineers from Europe, Japan, and the US flew in to observe, take notes, ask questions, and stand beneath a new truth forming right in front of them. They had underestimated Filipino innovation. Badly. And Rashid, once the man who rejected the blueprint, became its greatest defender. Because facts don't care about bias. Data doesn't bow to ego. And real engineering always reveals the truth in the end. By the time the tower topped out at 42 floors, 2 more than originally planned because the weight savings allowed it, the narrative was clear. A Filipino blueprint had just rewritten the rules of skyscraper design. And Rashid, he no longer cared about pride. He cared about accuracy, excellence, truth. And that truth was simple. Filipinos weren't just participants in global engineering. They were leaders, innovators, pioneers. Rashid learned something far more valuable than any award could teach him. Genius can come from anywhere. And sometimes it comes from the place you judged the fastest. He didn't just gain a colleague. He gained a friend, partner, teacher. And the city of Dubai gained something even greater. A new standard, a new mindset, a new definition of what's possible. All because one Filipino engineer refused to let arrogance bury his vision. And because one Emirati engineer finally chose humility over ego. The construction world would never be the same again. Not after this. Carlos Garcia didn't fully grasp what he had unleashed until the first steel frame of the Emirates Green Tower stood beside a bamboo-reinforced hybrid column, and the workers themselves began whispering. At first it was curiosity. Quiet comments exchanged in Tagalog, Arabic, Hindi, and English. Then it became fascination. Then respect. And then something else entirely. A shift. A shift in the way dozens of engineers, architects, and workers from around the world looked at Filipino engineering. Because when something extraordinary happens in front of your eyes, you don't need a conference. You don't need a scientific paper. You don't need permission to believe. You just know. But not everyone was ready to accept this shift. Not everyone wanted the world to believe a Filipino engineer could outthink, outdesign, and outperform Western engineering giants. And Rashid, who once stood against Carlos's design, quickly found himself fighting for it harder than he had fought for any project in his life. The turning point came during the 7th week of construction when a sudden sandstorm, one of the strongest in years, hit Dubai. A wall of dust roared across the city, swallowing the skyline in seconds. Cranes creaked. Workers scrambled for shelter. And the German consultants hired by the developers watched from behind glass windows, predicting failure. They whispered among themselves, smirking behind clipped accents and polished shoes. "Let's see what happens to the Filipino experiment now," one of them said. "When the bamboo snaps, they'll finally return to the proven methods," another added. Those words traveled fast. Arrogance always does. Rashid heard them. And for the first time, he didn't feel insulted on behalf of his reputation. He felt insulted for Carlos. For Manila. For the blueprint he once mocked. Meanwhile, Carlos stood outside, face shielded, dusty, unbothered, watching the hybrid columns sway gently like living organisms adjusting to the storm. The steel suppliers expected rigidity. Carlos expected flexibility. And the bamboo delivered exactly that. By the time the storm passed, the steel-only testing frames suffered microfractures, hairline cracks that would require inspection and reinforcement. The bamboo hybrid frames. 0 cracks, 0 stress points, 0 failures. The test showed the truth plainly. Bamboo, properly prepared, properly engineered, properly respected, was outperforming steel in Dubai's own environment. The next morning, Rashid called an emergency meeting. This time he didn't speak as the proud engineer who once dismissed innovation. He spoke as a man who had seen proof, lived it, measured it, and could no longer deny it. "We are not dealing with a theory," Rashid began. "We are dealing with a reality. A superior reality." He displayed new sensor readings, graphs showing strain responses during the sandstorm. The contrast was embarrassing. The German consultants' faces tightened. One tried to argue. But bamboo is not a globally accepted primary material, and steel was once dismissed as unstable, Rashid snapped. Glass towers were once called impossible. Skyscrapers were once fantasy. Progress does not come from repeating what the world already accepts. It comes from proving what the world refuses to. The room fell silent. For the first time, the entire committee listened, not to Rashid the traditionalist, but to Rashid the visionary. Or perhaps more accurately, Rashid the convert. Over the next months, construction accelerated at an unbelievable pace. Workers loved the bamboo components because they were lighter to carry. Architects loved them because they allowed more artistic freedom. Environmental regulators loved them because the building's carbon footprint was nearly 40% lower than traditional towers. And slowly, like an awakening, the narrative began to change. Headlines appeared in Dubai, then in Singapore, then Germany, then the US. Filipino blueprint redefines skyscraper engineering. Bamboo hybrid structure survives major storm, raises global questions. How a Manila firm outperformed Europe's best. At first, skeptics dismissed it as hype. But hype doesn't produce stress tests. It doesn't satisfy government auditors. Doesn't pass seismic modeling. It doesn't build a 40-story hybrid tower standing firm in the desert. Facts were facts. And the facts favored Carlos. Then came the interview request from the International Council for Sustainable Architecture. That was when the world stopped laughing. Because the ICSA only interviewed pioneers, people who changed the direction of the industry, not people who followed it. Carlos didn't want the spotlight. But Rashid insisted. It's your work, Rashid told him. Your brilliance. Your heritage. They need to hear it from you. And so Carlos spoke at a roundtable streamed worldwide. Engineers from Europe, Asia, and America watched. They expected complicated jargon. They expected bravado or academic stiffness. Instead, Carlos spoke with the quiet clarity of a man who understood something deeper than formulas. Engineering is not about dominance, he said. It's about understanding. Understanding materials. Understanding environments. Understanding history. Before steel existed, communities survived earthquakes and typhoons for centuries using materials nature provided. My work is not new. It is old, just rediscovered. The reaction was immediate. Thousands of comments. Praise. Debate. Curiosity. And something Carlos hadn't expected. Pride from Filipinos worldwide. FWs. Students. Architects. Teachers. Carpenters. Entire communities posted. Pinoy pride. Filipino excellence. We've always known, we just needed the world to see it. But the attention came with consequences. When you challenge industries, industries push back. Suddenly, article after article appeared questioning the reliability of bamboo. Is bamboo safe for high-rises? Can Manila engineers really outperform European firms? Is this just luck? Rashid was furious. He saw through it immediately. They're afraid, he told Carlos. Because if your design succeeds, every old assumption falls apart. And he was right. If a Filipino blueprint could dethrone a German firm, if bamboo could outperform steel in a skyscraper, if indigenous knowledge could rival Western engineering, then the hierarchy of global engineering would shift. Funding, prestigious contracts, patents, influence, everything would adjust. And not everyone wanted that adjustment, which made the next crisis even more dangerous. 2 months before completion, the Emirates Green Tower faced a critical sabotage attempt. Not a dramatic movie explosion. Not something criminal. But a quiet act done with a keyboard. Corrupted data. Someone altered wind load projections in the official government submission portal, making it appear the hybrid structure could not withstand Category 4 storm conditions. It was subtle, professional, and devastating if left unnoticed. A single inaccurate report could shut down the project, delay construction, trigger legal disputes, worst of all, destroy credibility. When the alert came, Rashid immediately suspected foul play. "Someone is trying to kill the project," he said. "Not the building, the idea behind the building." Carlos stayed calm. "Then we prove them wrong with transparency." For the next 70 hours straight, they worked side by side, running tests, recalibrating sensors, analyzing data, compiling new reports, filming documentation in real time to prevent further tampering. Workers brought them food because they refused to leave the site. Engineers from India, Pakistan, and the Philippines volunteered to help. Everyone felt the stakes. And when they submitted the corrected report, with video, timestamps, and raw sensor logs, the authorities not only approved it, they launched an investigation into the sabotage. The German consultants quietly withdrew their objections. Someone had tried to bury Filipino innovation. Didn't work. In fact, it did the opposite. It proved how powerful the innovation truly was. And then the moment came. The tower's final load test. A global audience. Live-streamed. Engineers from MIT, Tokyo University, and Munich Technical Institute watching from auditoriums. Every critic prepared to call it a failure. Every supporter praying for vindication. The skyscraper wasn't just being tested. A nation's reputation was. When the wind generators activated, blasting the tower with simulated desert winds stronger than the 2019 storm, the sensors lit up. The building swayed, flexed, absorbed, transferred, stabilized, exactly as Carlos predicted. The hybrid structure performed at 118% of required load capacity. The room erupted. Even Rashid, once an unshakable symbol of rigid tradition, closed his eyes and whispered, "Thank you, God." But Carlos didn't celebrate yet. He waited for the final reading. The resonance frequency test. The one test skeptics said bamboo could never pass. The vibrations hit the tower like a giant heartbeat. The structure held perfectly. When the final green indicator flashed on screen, Rashid grabbed Carlos by the shoulders and shouted, "You did it, my friend. You changed the world." No exaggeration. No metaphor. A Filipino blueprint had just rewritten global engineering standards. The building was approved. Journalists flooded the site. Headlines exploded worldwide. Dubai Tower passes crucial test. Filipino engineer leads breakthrough. Bamboo integration might be the future of skyscrapers. Manila firm topples European titans with unmatched design. That night, Carlos walked out onto the open-air deck of the nearly completed tower. The Dubai skyline glowed like a field of stars trapped in glass. Rashid stood beside him. For the first time, he looked not like a superior or a mentor, but an equal. "Carlos," Rashid said softly, "I want to thank you." "For what?" "For teaching me the one thing no university ever did, that excellence has no nationality. And that arrogance is the enemy of innovation." Carlos smiled. Not proudly, not smugly, but with quiet gratitude. "And thank you, Rashid," he replied, "for giving me 30 minutes. Rashid laughed. 30 minutes that cost me my ego, and gave me a future. Below them, workers, Filipino, Pakistani, Indian, Nigerian, Emirati, stood together looking up at the tower they built. Filipino idea. Filipino blueprint. Filipino engineer. And a Dubai legend humbled enough to embrace it. The Emirates Green Tower was no longer just a building. It was proof. Proof that brilliance exists everywhere. Proof that innovation can rise from any nation. Proof that the world underestimates Filipinos at its own risk. And this was only the beginning.